meeting is being recorded.
Hi there, everyone who's dialed in already. We normally start these webinars a couple of minutes past the hour just to let people filter their way in and get out of the waiting rooms. So go and grab yourself a cup of tea or a snack and we'll get started in a minute or two. Thank you. Okay, I think we may as well make a start. Hopefully, if anyone's a bit late, they can just pick up as we go along. So thank you everyone so much for joining our webinar today, whether you're dialed in live or whether you are listening on demand, which I love saying because it makes me feel like I'm on Netflix. We've got a really great webinar today. I'm really excited to share with you what we've been working on. So we'll start with a bit of housekeeping. So you should be able to see on your Zoom window a Q&A section. So if you've got any questions, please do feel free to pop them in there, and we'll get to those at the end. We'll also share our contact details with you if you'd like to contact us directly. So let's get going. Let's introduce ourselves. So first of all, hi everyone, I'm Helen McKenzie. I'm a Geospatial Advocate at CARTO, which basically means my job is to get people really excited and hyped up about geospatial. I'm really keen on data visualization, data storytelling. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm really can't wait to show you what we've been working on. And Paul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, hi, I'm Paul. I am a partner at CACI, focusing in the location intelligence area. So primarily at the moment, I work with leisure clients, also retailers, using our data to help them with their strategy. But with cost of living being clearly a big issue at the moment, I've been getting heavily involved in the work that we're doing and supporting our clients, and not clients actually, with publicly available information that we're sharing on the cost of living issue. And again, like Helen, I can now say I have a podcast, which makes me feel very, very socially media savvy. So we'll tell you a bit more about that as we go through.
Great, thanks, Paul. Do you wanna kick off?
Hey, yes, I've forgotten that was the plan that I go on from here. Okay, so
This
you're
was
seeing
perfectly rehearsed, I promise everyone.
right. So yeah, what are we focusing on today is that cost of living issue, and specifically around that, how consumer spending patterns are changing and how data can be mapped and analyzed in spatial platforms like CARTOs and like the one that we have as well. So in terms of sort of explaining a little bit about how we work together, so both CARTO and we have our GIS, we are partnering with CARTO to support us with our Insight Everywhere online product. Helen is going to be showing some examples of our data later on in the CARTO software. So that's introductions done, fantastic. Now what we're going to do is go through this agenda. So we'll have a quick look back at 2022. Always good to do that when you're on the last day of January. As I heard someone say today, it feels like about the 50th of January, but I think it's the last day that we're allowed to look back at last year. We're then going to look at who are the specific groups and areas, because we're talking mapping today, that are at risk from the cost of living. And then we're going to start getting our crystal ball out and saying, well, what do we think that's going to look like in the future? And again, Helen's going to start to spend some time going into mapping that and seeing which areas those are. I'm going to just wrap up with a final piece which links to the podcast that we've done recently around the sort of specific housing market challenges. And then we'll just wrap up with a summary. I think if you've got questions, please put them in the chat. We'll probably pick them up at the end, unless they're things like, it's not working, can you do something? So without further ado, very quick, a bit more of introduction in terms of what I'm going to be talking about. So we have what we're calling our toolkit on cost of living. This is all stuff that you can find sort of freely available on our website. You can get, but what we've been doing is trying to get behind those headlines on, we're all hearing scare stories every time we turn on the news around the cost of living, but there's a lot of, it's constantly moving, and we're trying to get through some of that noise. So one of the things we've been doing is actually asking people what they're thinking. We've been doing that March, June, September, November. We're just about to go out in the field to get other views. So I'm going to touch on a tiny bit of that we're doing to understand what are people's real sentiments on the cost of living. Okay, what we have then been doing is we have links with suppliers of anonymized transactional spend data. So we pool £23 billion worth of spend. I'm going to touch on some of that today, but it means we can actually see, what are people actually doing? Are they trading down? Are they moving to different product categories? We can see that. I've only a limited amount of time to touch on some of that. And then we've got some classifications that we produce that I'm going to touch on today that enables us to see, well, where are the people and what are their characteristics that are being affected? And that enables us to do some of the mapping that Helen's going to do today. And I'm going to touch on the slightly scary scenario forecasting that we're doing that says, well, given the budgets, how do we think it's going to affect people, which people, and where are they? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to touch on each bit very briefly today. If you want to know more, get in touch. So let's start by looking back, as I said. So this is my 2-minute summary of 2022 from a cost of living world. Okay, basically, if we start in the spring last year, that's as far back as I'm going to go. And as I said, we asked loads of questions. I've boiled it down to just 4 numbers here. But in the spring, people were already starting to see the cost of living challenges coming up. So 69% said that they planned to cut their spending. And you can see the detail here. And there was a lot of stuff earlier in the year around people like Netflix and Disney, who I have just cancelled, and they're constantly telling me that I'm about to cancel. It's like, no, as far as I'm concerned, I have. But 60% of people way back then were saying that actually we're seriously thinking about cutting streaming services, 54% using less energy. And there was this view of I'm going to start cutting some of those luxuries. But it was a lot of talk about I'm going to, because quite frankly, we'd had a rubbish couple of years. And actually, we didn't really want to do it, even though we knew we probably should. So I'm going to put one number up for the summer, which is when we went into our actual transactional data, we saw that what we call non-essential leisure spend, so that is stuff you don't have to buy, but that's going out, sort of luxury clothes, nice food, and various categories. We actually saw that go up year on year last summer. So that was actually against not that bad a summer the year before. But that basically implies we were kind of in denial. It had all been a bit rubbish. We were going to have our summer. Then we got to autumn and we went, I really need to do something about it. And actually, next round of surveys, 96% of people said they were going to actually cut spending. And actually, I've just thrown up 3 numbers here, which is again from our transactional data. So remember that inflation, I've forgotten the number now, it's about 14% or whatever it is now. What we're actually seeing is spend value from this transactional data is sort of, in the case of groceries and food and drink on the left-hand side, is down. It's actually up about 3%, but given inflation is at 14%, actually the value of products that we're getting is really down 11% if you net that off. Clothing is down 20%, and actually food and drink, eating out, has actually done not too badly. It's down 4% in value terms. So what we are seeing is people are clearly trading down. So using groceries as an example, what we're seeing is that, yeah, prices have gone up. They are not spending as much, which means they're doing one of 3 things. They are either buying less, they are buying cheaper stuff, or they are trading down to cheaper brands, cheaper products. So that is what we're seeing. Cost of living is impacting the economy. Okay, now let's start to look at the types of people who are being affected. Okay, now this is where I have to just briefly pause and introduce a couple of our products. So the first of them, which many of you may know already if you're into sort of using geospatial data, is our segmentation called Acorn. In simple terms, we put people into different segments based on their lifestyles and their affluence. So you can see A, most affluent, down to generally the least affluent, their difficult circumstances. There's also an element of life stage in there. So if you were to give me your postcode, and don't worry, I'm not asking for it, I would be able to put you into one of these pigeonholes. Obviously, everyone claims it's not them, it's their neighbors. But what you can see here is Group B, executive wealth. Good news is it's physically a big group. There are quite a lot of people who are executive wealth. If you go up this way, you will see that they are pretty affluent. If you go this way, you will see that they're slightly above the average age. Go down here, poorer pensioners, by definition, low income and older age. So that's a bit of context. We've been asking these people a load of questions in our surveys, and interestingly, what we've seen is that the older groups, the mature money, comfortable seniors and poorer pensioners, have actually come out as being amongst the most concerned when we actually interview them, which isn't necessarily what they should be seeing. I'll show you the next bit in a minute. But these are people who've been there. They've seen it. They've seen how bad a recession can be. So they're going, yeah, we've been there and we're concerned. And just so you know, in terms of Acorn, we have these pen portraits, personas that tell us a whole load of stuff about these people, what their ages are, lifestyles, brand preferences, and so on and so forth, so we can understand them. Okay, so that's the older groups. Interestingly, ask the same questions about their concerns. City sophisticates, urban, generally high income, younger groups, starting out, name defines itself, relatively young. Struggling estates, also a group with quite young population. These people have actually been saying over the last year that they're actually quite optimistic about the future. As I'm going to show you later, unfortunately, these could be some of the people most impacted. But it may actually be that this is the naivety of asking a question versus the reality. These guys haven't experienced a recession and may be in a bit of denial of what may happen. Okay. Just a few pretty pictures just to show we know who these people are. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to Acorn. And Helen, I'm just going to quickly hand over to you. Tell us a bit about the spatial perspective on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul. So I just wanted to really quickly interject here with just a thought that all of these trends that Paul has been talking about, all of this segmentation has a real spatial element to it. So it's impossible to think about these things without thinking about that spatial element. And you can see a map here that shows the dominant ACORN groups across the country. Obviously, the scale that we're at means that we can't see the detail in the urban areas. But you can see we've got a real top 10 groups here. We've got a real dominance of the countryside communities. We've got a real dominance of executive wealth, which sounds really nice. So yeah, just to point out that it's really important to think about the spatial element of these. When we send out the recording of this webinar, we'll also be sending out a link to the interactive map. So you can go into this and see which ACORN group is dominant in your area. I think in my area it is J starting out. I live in South London. So take a guess now and then you'll be able to find out soon. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, one of us broke up a bit then. I don't know if it was you or me, so I don't know if anyone else is tracking that, but I will, yeah, hopefully we'll get a message if there's anything we need to do. But yeah, as Helen said, later on we're going to zoom into some of these areas and tell a bit more of a story. But yeah, bear in mind this data goes right down to postcode level. Okay, right. That was quickly introducing ACORN. I want to just quickly introduce another product because then we're going to use them for the next section of the webinar. So we also want to know about people's disposable income. So we've produced a product called Paycheck Disposable Income, which tells us that. So the average disposable income at a household level sadly dropped last year. In fact, since March, from March last year to about October, when we rebuilt the product because things had changed so much, the average household income dropped from 18,900 to 18,000. So a huge drop due to people's incomes being squeezed. So the way that this product works is it takes people's incomes and forecasts and estimates then, and then it chunks off all of the bits that you have to spend, like boring things like tax and childcare and buying basic clothes and food, and leaves you with a pot that is your disposable element. So usually we update this every year. Someone's getting an unstable internet message, that may be me. So usually we update this every year, but because things changed so much last year, we ran a second scenario and built a new product. So we had to account for stuff like travel to work costs went up 26% in petrol, 19% in public transport. We had to, excuse the strange logos here, we had to account for the different energy caps, hence the hat, and the gift from the Chancellor of giving some money back. We had to account for the fact that government were going to give a raise in national insurance and they knocked it off. So we accounted for all of that and we built a new version. Now this is where we link Paycheck and ACORN and can start to tell some interesting stories. So let's break out a few things here. What we're showing here is the bigger the bar, the bigger the income. Okay, we've got an all line here, and then we get lavish lifestyle. So this is the one we'd all love to be. Big bar of income, and then that sort of salmon color is what's left to do fun stuff with. Okay, so that's the disposable element where you decide whether you want to buy a Ferrari, go on a nice holiday, or put it away for a rainy day. So lavish lifestyles have a big bar of income, and 44% of it is disposable. Then you come down to things like struggling estates, much lower income, and only 28% of it is disposable as we see it. Obviously, we know where these people are, so we can map that out. Okay, so some interesting things. City sophisticates, I mentioned them a little bit earlier. What we're seeing is, yeah, they have big incomes, but with everything that's been going on in the last year, they were already highly rented or highly mortgaged, this group. Look, only 23% of that income is actually disposable. They are quite vulnerable and being hit. But before you cry too much for people who are quite high income earners, you then got these groups much lower down the income spectrum. So these less affluent young groups, these have already got low incomes. They have also got very small shares of disposable income. So a group quite likely to be hit quite hard. Then we've got some groups which actually may not be doing quite as badly. So these are older groups, they have small incomes, but their lower fixed outgoings means hopefully these people should not suffer quite as much. But another quite stark stat that we're seeing coming out of this, for the first time, we've actually looked at how many households in an area or in the different groups might be at risk of actually going to what we're calling negative disposable incomes. In other words, they are that to live a basic life have to spend more than their actual income. And scary numbers there. So struggling estate stands out at the bottom there. 16% may actually have outgoings that are greater than their income. Now, that is clearly a big concern, those areas, particularly as these are people who are not likely to have a safety net of savings or family to support them. City sophisticates, also 8% could effectively be in the net negative disposable income. Hopefully that group probably has more family and saving support, but they are in a tricky location. And also student life, which doesn't just include students, it's people out of university recently living in flat shares where rents have been really rising, could be very, very vulnerable. Okay, so what have we done? Well, the next thing we can do is we know where those groups are, we can map them. And as I hand over to Helen here, this is where we sort of get that regional spread, which I'll let her go into in more detail and then zoom in a bit more.
Thanks so much, Paul. This is really interesting. And when we first started planning this webinar, we talked about how we could make this not depressing and optimistic and upbeat. So you might be able to tell we're trying to keep a really upbeat tone of our voice to try and keep this a bit lighter. But yeah, as Paul was saying, the next thing we wanted to do was have a look at the regional spread and how this differs per UK region. And we can see there are some real differences here. So we can see that the disposable income in areas like the southeast, southwest of England, for example, are doing okay. They've got more disposable income available, right down to places like London, where I'm sitting now, where the disposable income is really low. So it's down to 28% of your income, around 14,500. And I think something really interesting to think about, particularly with metropolitan areas like London or Manchester or Bristol, is actually what a household means. It's not necessarily a household in a traditional sense where you have maybe a couple of caregivers and a couple of dependents. It's normally formed of a few single people, a few people living together who may be in their 20s or 30s who aren't necessarily sharing that disposable income around. So I think anecdotally, the largest household I've known of is I had a friend who lived with 15 other people in South London. So imagine 14,500 spread between 15 people. It gets really tight. So there's that element to think about as well. And can we go to the next slide, please, Paul? Great, thank you. So that was a regional spread, but I think it's really important to think about how this differs locally. What we're looking at here is disposable income aggregated to spatial indexes. So if you're not familiar with spatial indexes, these are a type of geospatial data which, rather than traditional geometries like postcode areas or output areas, which are geolocated by a geometry string, which is basically a series of coordinate pairs, and that can get really, really long. Spatial indexes are geolocated by a reference string, a really short selection of numbers and letters, which makes them really, really small to store and really, really quick to analyze. So it's great for analyzing really detailed data like CACI's data. So what we're looking at here is the darker blue areas, like in the previous map, are areas which have really high levels of disposable income, ranging up to £52,000, which actually, when Paul first sent me this data over, I thought this was percentages because I didn't believe that anyone would have £52,000 there in the pocket, but apparently it's true. So this ranges from £52,000 down to £30,000. And you can see we've got some real local variations. So I've just picked out an example in North London here to show how quickly these things can change. So Hampstead Garden Suburb, which is an area in North London. If you're familiar with London, it's the area just north of Hampstead Heath where all the footballers live. They have about £37,000 spare income a year. Compare that to Tottenham, which is only a few miles northeast of that. They only have about £7,100 disposable income a year. So this can vary really, really, really locally. Thank you. Next slide, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's the world as it is now. So yeah, a world as we can see where disposable income is starting to be squeezed, and yeah, there's differences in there. But yeah, what we now want to do is just touch on looking forward. So this is where, I'm going to hold that, this is where we get into our crystal ball gazing, and what we're able to do is, for each of the different ACORN groups, we're able to build a future version of paycheck disposable income. Now, we've been doing this at various stages over the last year, as policy changes and as leadership has changed in the government. So interestingly, we ran scenarios last year when it was rumored that there was not going to be an energy cap, when things were starting to get really quite scary, and when the consumers we were interviewing were getting quite concerned. And we forecasted huge additional impact on the most vulnerable groups. And I've actually taken it out of the slides today just because of time. But yeah, we were seeing sort of, if I had a sort of a chart which was red is severe drops, blue is not so severe. Pretty well all groups were somewhere in the sort of red to salmon sort of shade, and particularly those at the lowest income. So it is no surprise that the then Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, announced the plans to bring in an energy price cap. And that massively calmed things when we ran that through our scenario tool. But we then had the brief Liz Truss moment, and then we had Jeremy Hunt coming in and trying to calm things, and his mini-ish budget. And we have taken that scenario and our latest estimates of inflation and mortgage rates and come up with a new forecast of how we think that things could change by around about April next year, baselined against last October. And again, unfortunately, we still see some concerning trends. So on average, from that autumn statement, we were seeing that we were likely to see disposable incomes fall by 10%, and we were setting this new disposable income level by each ACORN group. But again, what you can start to see is some real variance. And it's those groups that we've seen flagged before. So city sophisticates, which we said potentially has some sort of buffer, but we think that they are going to see a drop in income, disposable income of about 18%. Student life and struggling estates, both of which were already on pretty tight incomes, likely to see disposable incomes drop by a further 20% due to a number of things. So yes, affluent homeowners up here are a little bit more insulated, but even they are going to notice some sort of drops. But we are seeing significant increases amongst these younger groups who are most vulnerable to housing costs, whether that's through mortgages, which I'm going to touch on at the end today, or through the carry through of sort of buy-to-let mortgages feeding through to rental levels. So yeah, less affluent consumers, the more vulnerable sections of society are likely to be seriously impacted hardest. I'm going to hand over to Helen, who's going to drill into the mapping. I think I have to remember to stop sharing my screen here, so bear with me while I try and remember how to do that. And then we will Helen will drive you through some mapping, and then I'll just wrap up with our latest thoughts on the housing market.
Great, cool. Thank you so much, Paul. Okay, yes, on to some maps. So hopefully you can all see my screen. So just a quick addendum for anyone who's not familiar with CARTO or what we do. We're basically a location intelligence platform. We're a data provider. We provide analytical tools for people to conduct really interesting spatial analysis. And what you're looking at here is CARTO Builder, which is our visualization and analytics platform. So the data set we are looking at here sort of encapsulates a lot of what Paul was just talking about. So we're looking at the absolute disposable income reduction based on CACI's forecast. So you can see here, we're really seeing that in the southeast of England, that's where disposable income is being most reduced, and actually towards the more rural areas and in Northern Ireland, Northern Scotland, and sort of West Wales, that's where we're seeing the least reductions. As I mentioned earlier, what we've done is taken data from, I think, output areas that Paul provided to us, which is the sort of lowest form of census geography, although I believe the CACI data goes even more detailed down to postcode level. Is that correct, Paul?
Yep.
Great. So we've taken that and we've aggregated that to spatial indexes. And the reason we've done that is this is just a huge amount of data, and to be able to work with it, being able to visualize it in this type of data set just makes it so much quicker. You can see as we zoom in and out, you get to see more and more detail being revealed. So as I mentioned earlier, areas like the Southeast and London are really hardest hit in terms of absolute disposable income reduced, but that's not the whole story, because we also need to think about the percentage of disposable income reduction. So we can see, again, London is particularly affected, but actually as you look out towards the suburbs, so again, this area is the one I mentioned earlier, Hampstead, which is very affluent. Also areas like Wimbledon and Richmond, which are very affluent, actually have had the percentage of their disposable income reduced a lot less. And this is kind of a trend we can see across the whole country. So we can see that rural areas are generally losing a lower percentage of their income compared to metropolitan areas like Birmingham and London. And as you can see, that's reflected across the whole country. So I believe what we're going to go into next is talking about how businesses can use this data to help them de-risk and plan for the future. Paul, shout if that is not the right thing that I'm supposed to be talking about right now. Great, thank you. So how can spatial analytics help with companies planning for the cost of living crisis? So we're going to be looking at CPG or FMCG companies, as they're often referred to in the UK. So basically consumer packaged goods, as a bit of a case study for this. So what is keeping CPG companies awake at night? What's the sort of main problems they're thinking about? Well, their consumers are, as we can see from a lot of this data, quite rightfully worried about inflation. And that means they're actively managing their finances, and often that means they're trading down, as Paul was talking about earlier. So that might mean buying less or buying more economy brands or buying in bulk, all these sort of strategies that I'm sure a lot of us are having to think about at the moment. So what are company responses to that? Well, they can be innovating with new categories or segmenting their geographies, which we'll talk about in a second. They might be wanting to improve their promotional effectiveness and using advanced analytics to really drive that and pinpoint how to address certain customers in certain locations. And then finally, data-driven marketing to account for how consumers are shifting their behaviors. So let's look at a typical use case. I've put on my Herbal Essences hat today and pretending I'm a data analyst over there. So Herbal Essences sell hair care products, and they have a really wide range of products and price points. So I've just grabbed these products and price points from the Boots website today. You can see we've got shampoos ranging from £2 for their really economy brands up to £10 for their argan oil repair shampoo, which sounds absolutely lovely. And their route to market for hair care products is quite diverse. So you can get these products from multiple channels, whether it's pharmacies and health stores like Boots, like I just mentioned, convenience and grocery stores, beauty salons and hairdressers. There's really a lot of different routes to market. So how could spatial analytics help a company like Herbal Essences de-risk for the challenges to come that Paul's outlined in their amazing data sources? Well, it's all about thinking about where you can target and how you can target people and stores differently. So for example, customers watching their spend, but still with higher levels of disposable income. So maybe in those rural areas that we talked about, in some of those groups that Paul mentioned, who are maybe slightly more insulated from these challenges, you might think about more offers and more promotions, or more targeted marketing, or stocking more bulk buy products so they save money over time, because everyone is watching their spending, but some people still have a bit more money available than others. Conversely, if customers have really reduced levels of disposable income and they're really struggling and really having to strategize, then you might want to target them slightly differently. So you might want to stock more economy range products like the £2 coconut shampoo I showed you earlier, or maybe actually as a sort of a more sort of extreme strategy is actually stocking fewer products, because you'll have fewer outgoings that way and you might be selling a bit less. So these are different ways that spatial analytics can help, and I'm just going to go through an example now. So let's just move that and take a look at this. So in this example, we're still Herbal Essences, and we're trying to decide how we might want to alter our strategies for different stockists across the West Country, which I've chosen entirely biased because that's where I'm from. So what we've got here is a map showing all of the different pharmacies and drugstores, cosmetic stores, health stores across the West Country. And we're going to do a bit of analysis on these stores and their catchments to see how they're being affected by the cost of living crisis. So the way we want to do that, first of all, is establish a catchment for each store. And to do that, we're going to create drive time areas. And then we're going to enrich that catchment with some of this data that Paul shared from CACI on disposable income levels to work out how different stores and different residents in those stores' catchment areas are being affected by the cost of living crisis. So the way that we did that, and this is actually a bit of analysis I created earlier, is we've used CARTO workflows. So if you follow CARTO on social media, we've been shouting about this for the last couple of weeks because it's really exciting. CARTO used to be quite a high code platform. You had to have really good SQL knowledge or Python knowledge to get the most out of our analytics toolbox. But now we've just moved to this. Actually, we have both, but we have another option for people, which is this new no code analytics tool called CARTO Workflows, which is kind of a flow diagram way of analyzing your data. So this is one I executed earlier because I didn't want you to sit and watch me building one of these. But what we have here is we have our 650 pharmacies. And you can see what I can do here is just bring these up on a map if my Wi-Fi is good enough. Looks like it's taking a second. Maybe I'll show you the data behind it actually. So these are our 650 pharmacies in our area of interest. These are our areas where we will potentially be selling our shampoos. And what we're going to do is create ISO lines from these. Now, ISO lines are, like I mentioned, drive time catchments. So they basically take a point on a map, your pharmacy, and say, how far can I drive within a, in this instance, 10-minute drive from each of these stores? And we'll say that within those 10-minute drive, within that 10-minute drive, those people who live there are your potential customers or your likely customers. So you can see that's what we've got here. We've got our 10-minute drive. So when you're running a workflow, you can visualize the data and the analysis in every step, either in tabular format or on a map. So that's what we've got here. These weird pink blobs are our 10-minute drive time catchments. Then what we're going to do is run, and the reason this is red is because I've already run it, so it won't let me overwrite it immediately. We're going to run a tool called Enrich Polygons, which basically takes our disposable income data, which you can see here. Not in very much detail, it's a preview, but this is the same data I was showing you just now, showing the percentage and absolute disposable income reduction. So basically this procedure here, which is our enrich polygons, which is a custom call procedure, enriches each of our drive time catchments with that data. So we will now know for each drive time catchment what the average disposable income reduction is, both in terms of absolute and percentage terms. And then we're just going to save that as a table, which I've saved here in my Google Cloud warehouse. And then a real Blue Peter moment, one I created earlier, we've got here. So we can see for each of our pharmacies, the reduction in disposable income on average in their drive time areas. So you can see, for example, we've got these big dark red blobs in sort of northeast Bristol, northwest Bristol, sorry, geographers should know their east and west. We can see that those areas have had a real reduction in their disposable income. These are quite affluent areas, but also a really sort of studenty area, and we know those are people who are potentially very much at risk. Whereas we can see also in the more rural areas, like around Keynsham here, this area sort of south of Bath, the income has been reduced a bit less. One of the really great things about Builder as well as being able to visualize your data on a map is you can bring in things like these widgets to be able to help you drill down into the data a bit more. So here I've got my top 5 stores which have the most disposable income reduction. So for example, you can see the store where the catchment has been most reduced is, oh, why did I pick one that's French? L'Occitane in Bristol. This is the store where disposable income has been reduced by the most. So this is a store where you might be thinking, I want to be stocking economy products here, or I might be wanting to be stocking things a little bit less. And you can see in this pop-up, we've got all this information about that individual store. We've got a little Google Street View pop-up so you can see a bit more information about it. So that's a really quick whistle-stop tour, because I know that Paul wants to share a bit more information with you and then we want time for questions. But that's a really quick whistle-stop tour of how you might want to use location intelligence to help you plan for the future around the cost of living crisis. Paul, back to you. I've stopped sharing.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if I'm clever enough to get it back on the screen. Yeah, that should be coming up right now. You just do a thumbs up, Helen, if you can see it.
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah,
Thank
right.
you.
Fine. And you've seen the slide that was before we broke. Okay, so let me just quickly change the view that I have on my screen. There we go. So hopefully what we've done so far is illustrate that, yeah, data is out there to start to understand this real major challenge that a lot of our consumers, our customers, or the public that we're serving are being impacted by. And yeah, Helen there has shown how you can use that data to actually get proper insights at a local level. I just wanted to touch on something, and this is taken from the latest podcast that we recorded earlier in the month, and I'll put the web link up to sort of where you can get that at the end of the session. But yeah, at the turn of the year, the big sort of elephant in the room on all things cost of living was the real serious rise in mortgage rates and rental rates. Now, I wanted to just sort of blow out a few of the headlines that have come out of it. Now, when we wrote the advert for this, there were signs that things were actually slightly improving. It's changing on a day-by-day basis, and I think that I'm going to put the negative headline up, and then I'll put some sort of slightly brighter cloud on it. But yeah, but there is serious concern around what is going to happen in the housing market. But in early December, interest rates seem to only be going in one direction, and they were going up and up and up. They have softened a little bit. There is signs that inflation is slowing. There are signs that interest rates are going down. So yeah, we are in a better place than we were at the end of last year. It does seem that the interest rate rises that the government have brought in are starting to impact people. I saw an economist talking at a conference I went to a couple of weeks ago. Unfortunately, apparently it takes about 18 months for the true effect of interest rate rises to actually have the effect that people want on the economy. So we seem to be ahead of that, and things are improving. But I'm now going to go into the however piece. However, the higher costs of borrowing have got considerable implications and are likely to impact people over this year amongst groups who probably used to describe themselves as relatively comfortable. Okay, so a few things to note. So from our analysis, something like 700,000 households are going to have to renegotiate their mortgage in the first half of this year. Now, 2/3 of those are groups that would have taken out their first mortgage when interest rates were at about 2.5%. And now they're looking at rates like 5%. So it is not surprising that when we interviewed people, about 78% of people say that they are concerned about their mortgages over the next 12 months. And 26% of those who actually said that their mortgages are expiring this year say they are extremely concerned. Okay, now it's worth noting, again, it's amazing how many things go back to COVID, but yeah, we all heard news stories of people moving house and stuff during COVID, and yeah, they'd managed to save some money. What we're actually seeing is a lot of people took out 2-year fixed rate mortgages at that point, and there were a lot of people who were taking the step for the first time to get on the housing ladder. They'd had a tough time getting on. So 2 years on, you come to the beginning of this year, and that is where suddenly we've got people who were taking out a 2-year fix and going, yeah, I can just about do it if things are at 2.5%, are moving into the 5% world. So they are facing much higher mortgages. And yeah, we are seeing large numbers of people saying that they are going to need to make cuts to afford this. Okay, some scary stats, sort of playing those numbers through. We're seeing that as many as 100,000 homeowners this year additional homeowners could go into arrears as a result of this, and it could be as many as 7,000 families could be at risk of losing their homes if they're unable to make those payments. Now, obviously, if large amounts of money are being taken out of the economy to pay mortgages, that also has knock-on effects on other businesses where people would spend that money. Now, what we are seeing is that that's not going to be a quick hit. an awful lot of people are extending their mortgage term. So they might have said, right, I'm going to pay this mortgage off in 25 years. They're now going, well, I can't. Now there's been that step up. I'm going to pay it over 30 years. So some of that increase in mortgage payments is being deferred. But obviously, again, that's going to have ripples. That means people who are being stretched now are going to be stretched over a much longer period of time. And obviously, if you pay a loan off over 30 years, you pay back a lot more than you do over 25 years. But we are seeing that people are being sensible, they are being prudent. Those that can save are, those that can extend their mortgage are. And yeah, there are sort of people making sensible judgments when we look into the data that we have access to. But at the end of the day, there are some risks that some people will simply really struggle. Okay, but as I touched on earlier, if mortgage rates go up, it also filters down, particularly in the private rental market, because ultimately, if people have been buying private houses for private rental, they have to feed that through from their mortgages going up. And yeah, rents are on average up 4% and rising. And yeah, with renters typically spending 25% of their outgoings on housing costs, this level of movement is a big impact on their ultimate finances. So again, it's not just about people who are mortgaging, it is the areas that are rental, high rental as well. And if we were to loop that back into the ACORN classifications, that is groups like the city sophisticates, the starting outs that are being impacted. So a risk of ending up on that stat, where we're at is, yeah, hopefully we've explained some of the issues happening in the market. We are going to share these slides, and there's a recording up there that you may be listening to already that enable you to go through some of these stats a little bit slower. But ultimately, what we want to get across today is that location data can really help you to navigate whatever your business is, whatever your interest is, and why you're here. Products like our data products of things like ACORN and Paycheck that I've touched on today, our catchment model, location dynamics, our spend estimates, can all help you to understand at a local level what's going on. We can also help with consumer research. We carry out scenario plannings and actually looking at detailed transactional data, all of which can ultimately be analyzed in mapping software to really give you that granular level. So the link at the bottom, which we'll probably share somehow, gives you a link to our sort of free stuff that gives you the sort of macro level, and 5 seconds so that we can claim that we've hit that. Thing that's in the chat, please share.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. This is so interesting. I feel like we could have done about 3 hours on this. It's absolutely fascinating to dive into. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, and we've got about 5 minutes to go through them, so that should be plenty of time. So, Paul, first of all, we've got a question from Gianfranco. I think it's more of a question for you, but the question is, are these maps available to the public or government? Oh.
Okay, are the maps available? Okay, yeah, are the maps available to the public or government? These slides are, and yeah, if you go onto that web link, we do have the sort of national stuff. If you want the real detail, you can either apply some of the stuff that we put up free of charge, or we do have access. We can supply that data either into your own mapping tools or through our mapping tools. So yes, the answer is partly, but yeah, we spent sort of quite a lot of money on it. So the real detailed stuff, even to the government, they have to pay.
Great. And Paul, I don't know if you can see the second question, but I think this is more for you as well. Are you capturing also migration data?
We have data on how people move around, which we actually get from anonymized mobile data. In terms of actually people migrating, we are as reliant as pretty well anyone is on sort of government sources and things like the National Health Service registers and things. But any data that can be captured can be viewed spatially. But yeah, we're not actively sourcing it, but be interested to know what the use case is. And yeah, if you want to get in touch, there's always ways around these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also add to that with keep an eye on the census data. If you go to nomis.co.uk, so NOMIS, they're slowly starting to trickle out the 2021 census data on there. I don't believe the migration data is yet available, and often that's at quite a high geography, so it's often between regions or local authorities, and it's not super local. But I definitely recommend taking a look on there to look for migration data.
And do be warned, be warned, migration data might be a bit dubious because of when the census was done during a lockdown. So,
yes, exactly.
but yeah,
I feel like the whole 2021 census needs a little disclaimer above it. For sure. Cool. Thank you. And we've got a couple of other ones that I'll try and answer super quickly. So first of all, how does pricing for creating isolines work? So isolines were the drive time catchments that I showed you to be able to assess demographics within a catchment of a store. So the pricing for those with CARTO is built into CARTO. It works on a credit-based system. So you get 1 credit, and 1 credit is 1 catchment for 1 location, so 1 store. And so if you wanted to run catchments for 10 stores, that would be 10 credits. And depending on your subscription plan with CARTO, you'll get a varying number of credits. I think the small enterprise level is 12,500 credits, which is quite a lot. So there is quite a generous allowance. And we've got a question from James. Oh, hi, James. How are you doing? Good to see you here. I've got a question on CARTO. You did drive time catchments in the example. Can CARTO also do public transport catchments based on actual timetable data? Unfortunately not, which is very sad, because that is a really, really interesting use case. We at the moment just have drive time data, drive time catchments, walking catchments, and cycling catchments, which for the majority of our customers' use cases fits the bill really well. But that's always a really, really interesting use case to look at. So thank you for bringing that up. And I believe that is all of our questions. No problem. Thanks, James. So thank you again, everyone, so much for coming along to this. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. We'll be sharing the webinar link, as well as any sort of links to documentations or websites that we've mentioned in this that will be in your inbox probably in the next few days. And yeah, from Paul and I, thanks for coming, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.